how do you introduce Alice Bergen Phillips? I've tried a number of times now, and it just can't be summed up in a quick introduction. She is a cheesemonger, entrepreneur, business owner, general badass of the cheese industry, makes the best platters you will ever see. But for the sake of this conversation, Alice is a person that I met early in a transition in my, career in cheese. And she was a person that, whether she knows it or not, I really looked up to in terms of what was possible. I was working at a shop. She was sort of just, I think, getting ready to transition into her own business. And it was really fascinating to watch, and getting to work with her a few times, it was fascinating to watch her work and really inspiring. And I think that that can be useful for a lot of people out there who look at the industry and wonder kind of what their next step is and where they'll be going next. In this episode, we talk about how Alice got started in cheese and all the steps that she took to get where she is ultimately today. So I can't say thank you enough times to her for sitting down with me. And I want to say thank you to you too for finding this and downloading it and joining me here today as well. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you feel inclined, do all those things, leave a review, blah, blah, blah. Not good at the promotional parts. Maybe get better in time. Maybe we won't need to. Anyway, thank you so much. Here we go. Alice Bergen Phillips. My name is Scott Freestone, and this is Monger. Awesome.
Good.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I appreciate you being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Just tell me quickly to get started, sort of how you got into cheese and, how long you had to be in the business before you were like, I'm a real monger now.
Ooh, that's a great question. I feel like I've only maybe recently felt like I'm a real monger. I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things where I always hesitate to call myself like an expert in something, just because the more you get into it, the more you realize you don't know and that you need to learn. But I mean, that being said, I feel like I can definitively say at this point that I am a cheesemonger.
Yeah.
And I know a few things.
You're a cheesemonger.
I'm a cheesemonger, yeah. So I started, I got into cheese in a very like circuitous way, which I think is like almost everybody's story.
Yeah.
But basically I got into cheese through coffee, which I think is similar to you. I think we've talked about this. Yeah. But I started in coffee for real when I first moved to DC. I moved here because I was a political science major, and I started working at a national security think tank, but needed extra money because DC is real expensive. And so so I started working at a coffee shop, and they were like very intense about learning about production, where things come from, tasting notes, all of that kind of stuff. And I was really lucky in that I worked with a whole bunch of geeks who, every time we'd get a new roast in, every time we'd get a new whatever, we would like geek out and do tastings and figure out flavor notes and all that kind of stuff.
But you started just in the capacity of barista.
Oh yeah. Yep. I was a barista. I wasn't even that good of a barista, so a lot of times they just put me on the cash register. But it was really fun to sort of like deep dive into food.
Yeah.
And then I ended up moving to California a couple years later, and had this sort of light bulb moment when I was working for this. The first job I had there was for this like celebrity chef guy who did pop-up restaurants, and they hired me as a server, which God knows why, because I'd never been a server and I was terrible at it.
Sounds fun though.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, but I had this light bulb moment where I was like, oh, food can be a real thing.
Right.
Food can be like a legitimate career. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. If you can hear my baby in the background.
It's okay.
So I got a job as a barista at a place in Laguna Beach near where I lived, and as a barista. But they had a cheese counter as well, and the head cheesemonger quit about 2 weeks after I started.
Perfect.
And I just kind of jumped in, and I'd always loved cheese. I was lucky and traveled a lot when I was younger, around Europe, and had been to Switzerland and France and England, and had a ton of really delicious cheese. Was not afraid of like the stink factor and all that kind of thing.
And you walked into it not completely blind.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I'd been exposed to some good cheeses, and I'd also, so my mom's British, and my grandparents had a farm in the north of England that I grew up going to in the summers, and they had chickens and hens or goats and all that kind of stuff, and so I already kind of had a foundation of like, this is where food comes from, and this is where this is what it's like to milk a goat, this is what it's like to go and collect eggs, all that kind of stuff, and the difference in flavor between those things and what we would get in the supermarket at home. So that was kind of part of it. And then my grandmother had trained as a chef at the Cordon Bleu when she was younger, and so you take those ingredients, you put it with someone who has some sort of expertise and know-how, and you get these really incredible products. But so food had always been sort of like this hobby, this thing that I really kind of like loved, but didn't consider something that, I don't know, for some reason it like never occurred to me that it could be something that I could like.
The best hobbies aren't careers. That's why they're
that's true. But so basically all of those things kind of converged into this cheese position, and I realized like, oh, I've kind of been like training for this forever, and I didn't even know it. So then I was there for about 1.5 years, and by the end of that job I knew that I wanted to stay in cheese. I knew I wanted to stay in food, and I had an inkling that eventually I would like to have my own place. But I also knew that I needed, if I was going to work in cheese, I needed some wine knowledge. So that was my next move, was to work at a wine bar, basically. And then I also knew I needed more management experience because I'd just been sort of like the lowest on the totem pole at all of my food jobs, and I knew that I needed more sort of like, how did the logistics work?
Had you like abandoned all college plan at this point?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad kept telling me I could go to law school if I wanted to, up until I started Cheesemonster. He kept being like, you could go to law school. Right.
Right until you're like, I've invested in, know.
Yeah, exactly. But at that point, I don't know. I feel like I spent a few years being like, I don't know what to do, but I don't like what I've sort of been trained to do school-wise. But I like this other thing, but I don't know if it's real. And then by the end of my time at that cheese place, I was like, okay, this is a thing that I can do.
Was the shop high volume?
Ish. Yeah, I mean, depend on the season, like any
neighborhoody or foot traffic-y?
Well, it was, so it was this place called Sapphire Pantry, and it was a little gourmet shop that was attached to a restaurant. So the restaurant was Sapphire, and then we were Sapphire Pantry, and so we had a walk-in cheese humidor, basically, which was like very cool. Yeah. Although it went wrong like constantly, because when you have something that's temperature and humidity controlled, there's lots of things that can happen. But we also had a coffee bar and like sandwiches to go and all of that kind of stuff, and so we would get sort of our like coffee customers in the morning, and a lot of foot traffic at night from like people from the restaurant going home, like wanting to pick up a bottle of wine or some cheese or whatever.
And were you was every Monger there a piece of all the parts of the business? You made sandwiches, you sold bottles, you cut cheese. We
were attached to the kitchen of the restaurant, so they're the ones who would like make the sandwiches, make the salads, make all that stuff, and they would bring it out to us. But we, you sort of had to wear many hats, where you had to, be sort of, some people were better at coffee than cheese, some people were better at cheese than coffee, but you kind of had to be able to jump in. Right. We had this like golden 10 months. I feel like this happens a lot in jobs where like we had this amazing 10 months where like everybody was really good at everything and everybody got along really well with everyone. And then inevitably it always just falls apart.
Right. Yeah, the golden window.
Yeah, exactly. And it was fantastic. But
I often wonder if that's pure hindsight, because I think everybody at every job has that, right? Sometimes you stay a place a lot of years, not to digress, but you say 2 years ago. Remember that? Remember that summer where we were just in the pocket?
I think we realized it towards the end when like the first person left.
Right.
We were like, oh man, we had a really good crew.
Right.
And then, I mean, it just, people, especially in food, people, move on with their lives. And it really is. Mm-hmm. It really is. But it was it taught me a lot. And it was cool too, being attached to the kitchen, because one of the major things that I learned in that job was not just, I mean, I obviously learned about like the cheeses themselves as well, but the chef at Sapphire was really great about teaching me how to plate, because we would do cheese plates for the restaurant, but we would also do like catering boards, so like big boards to go.
Monger's built restaurant boards and platters.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so he taught me about how height is important on a board, to put things together on a board that go, that are next to each other, that would go together, and all that kind of stuff, and sort of gave me a foundation for board building, which is kind of what I've become known for. So, so that was like really huge. And also, because we were attached to a kitchen, we were able to get all of this like amazing, homemade like condiments and like sauces and things that we could pair with cheese. We were, the chef really encouraged us to try everything, to like come up with new combinations. By the end of my time there, I had a little bit of a say of like what would go on the cheese boards in the restaurants and all of that kind of stuff. So it was. And
how long were you in that shop?
I was there a year and a half. I was there about a year and a half, and then I left there. Well, I left there because then I got married and went on my honeymoon, and then came back and switched over. Well, so we were in Southern California because my husband was in the Marine Corps. And so I knew that we only had about 9 months left before he was getting out and we were going to move. And so I was like, well, I should take advantage of being in California and really focus on wine so that I can bring that back to cheese eventually. Yeah. So when I got back from my honeymoon, I found a job at a wine bar and did that for a little bit.
Do you think you've always seen the bigger picture of the puzzle? I mean, I think a lot of mongers that I meet, at least, you can see pretty quickly if they are looking for that, as well. You can tell they have an interest in many, many things, but cheese may be the focus. Yeah, I think, I pretty quickly after starting that job, I started, sort of piecing the puzzle together. I knew I kind of wanted to stay a generalist in terms of like cheese itself. Like I love working in cheese and being, I'm really interested by like all the different facets. Like you'll meet certain people who deep dive into like, the super sciencey part of cheese or the super history culture part of cheese and all that stuff. And I love sort of dipping my toe into all of those things, sort of depending on what is necessary. So I knew that I didn't want to like solely focus on one area within cheese, but I knew that there were other areas outside that I also then needed to dip my toe into in order to be successful at it. Did you guys do off-site there? Any like catering off-site?
No, it was all on-site. At least all the stuff I did was on-site. So like the restaurant would do catering and stuff.
Then
like,
pick up platters and all that.
Exactly. But all the stuff that I did was on-site. I didn't start doing off-site stuff until I got back to DC and couple jobs later got another cheese job.
Yeah, when you made the move, did you look specific to cheese when you were looking at DC?
No, I actually, when we moved back to DC, because my husband got out of the Marine Corps and then got into grad school at GW and got an internship at the State Department. So I guess we're going back to DC, which was kind of great because I already knew it. Although we were gone for 3 years, and in those 3 years I feel like that's when sort of like the food revolution in DC really happened.
Different.
And I came back and I was like,
what year did you land back?
2014. So we left in 2011 and came back in 2014. And I remember the coffee shop that I originally worked at, which is now no longer a thing, was on 14th Street, and like going back to 14th Street and just seeing all of the restaurants. It was like, it felt like Disneyland. Like it was just so different. But perfect timing to sort of jump back into food.
Yeah.
But so I came back with an eye to get into like a management position, because coming back I was like, okay, I've sort of done the cheese thing and I feel like I have at least a foundation there. Like I'll need to get back to it. There's a lot that I don't know, but I also know that first, in order to like move forward, I really need to get some management experience. So I actually started working at Baked and Wired in Georgetown, and I started as a barista and then got promoted to manager pretty quick, and then started working at their second spot, Bake Joint, and helped start putting like menus together. I was the tea director. British, so of course tea.
Right, had to. So taking on more responsibility in the business, but
exactly
in a behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. More behind the scenes stuff. More sort of like learning how to manage, like employees, and sort of seeing different like management styles, and learning from my bosses, learning from other managers, all that kind of stuff.
Had you had pretty good experiences with management in cheese or restaurants to there?
Yes and no. I fondly call some of my bosses evil geniuses, in that I've worked for a lot of people who are amazing at what they do, but are incredibly exacting.
Right.
And so like the celebrity chef I worked for was a freaking genius. Like his food was incredible, but like he was a psycho. Like he was crazy, but there was a reason. Like it was, like it's one thing if you just work for someone who's a psychopath who like is also terrible at what they do. I don't think I could stomach that. But when you work for someone and you're like, I see what you're doing, also you're terrifying, but like I get it. I kind of learned
just in a way that they were very hard, or really exacting standards,
exacting standards, and also sort of had a vision that is hard for like mere mortals to totally comprehend.
You're expected to see you're expected to see a thing with no setup.
Exactly. So that sort of taught me one, having standards, what that looks like, why it's important, all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, there are certain things that like, I'm not a yeller. I'm not, and also sort of like seeing the effect of like being so intense on your staff, and how that burns people out really quick, and all that kind of a thing. So it, you sort of like I tried to like take the good things and, learn from the things that I thought weren't so positive.
Sure.
But, I mean, Baked and Wired, definitely taught me a lot about presentation as well. Like it was they don't do anything really with cheese apart from put it in biscuits, which is amazing. But like in terms of like actual, cheese counter, cheese biz, they don't do anything, but they're very exacting in terms of this is how these pastries are plated. This is how, it has to look. Like I understand if you're really busy, but as soon as you have a moment, you need to refill, you need to restock, you need to make it look good, because that's what sells things. And they could be really harsh about that, but also like there's a reason, so learning how important it is to, make a good presentation definitely translated to my next cheese job. So I worked for them for almost 2 years, I think, something like that. And then at that point I was like, okay, I really would like to get back to cheese. Like it's been a while. I feel like I've gotten a lot of good experience. And then this opportunity came up at Via Umbria to start a cheese counter, which was very daunting, because it wasn't just like manage a cheese counter that's already built, but like do it. Right.
So when you moved there, they had no counter.
Yeah, I did. So they had hired Katie Carter as a consultant. So she really helped me a lot in terms of like introducing me to cheeses. Moving from West Coast to East Coast, like it was
a different
entirely new world. Exactly. So she was really instrumental in getting me sort of like up and running, and introducing me to things, showing me how to, even stuff like how to really wrap properly. Because when I worked in cheese at Sapphire Pantry, the cheesemonger had left. So it was kind of the Wild West.
Right, you're just figuring it out every day.
Exactly. And so like my wrapping was horrible. Not as bad as some people, but like by standards now it was real bad. And all that kind of stuff. And so, she was really great in terms of getting me and that counter up and going, and all of that kind of stuff. So I wasn't totally alone. But, then sort of figuring out what, how many cheeses to have, the varieties, the presentation, and that place too, Via Umbria does, we have the cheese counter, which is retail, and then we also had like restaurant stuff and catering stuff, and so you could get into it from a whole bunch of different perspectives, and so being able to juggle all of that kind of stuff was really fun. And that's where I first started doing sort of like off-site stuff as well, which was fun.
How did you decide not what to put in the case, but how did you just simply say, this is my real estate, I will pack this baby with cheeses?
But also I tried to have as few this is my own term, but for lack of a better term, like bullshit cheeses as possible. So, when you go to cheese counters, a lot of times in order to pack it and also have your margins be okay, you do have to have some cheeses that like cheesemongers are not crazy proud of. Sure. But like they have great margins.
Utility players.
And people will buy them. Right. Exactly. And
I look at them like things that you see very differently as a monger and as a shop runner or manager. It's really funny. You eventually find these cheeses that you used to be like, I try not to sell that. They don't want that. Yeah. And then you move over and start looking at everything in this different light, and you're like, you should sell that. You know what I mean? Like people want that.
People want it. Right. It's going to make us money, and they're good. They tend to be good, like gateway.
Yeah, like this is a real conversation. Exactly. Those customers tend to be the most important. They're the ones that you actually have to work on. And deal with.
Exactly. And they're also people who like, not everybody has like super crazy palates and wants something different and crazy and intense all the time.
Right, nor should they.
Yeah, nor should they. Right. Exactly. I tell people this a lot, especially when I do classes. I find, for some reason, it's always old men, but I'll always get one old guy who will ask me a question and be like, so what do you think about Velveeta? Or like, what do you think? Or like, what do you think about American cheese? And I always tell people that I'm an equal opportunity cheese person. Sure. And that's how I feel about those cheeses. Right. That's how I feel about them now. At the time, because my like world was being expanded to like all of these really cool niche artisanal cheeses, that is pretty much what I wanted to bring in. And I kind of had to learn that like, you know what, you really do need to have some things that are...
And how you balance your passions, for lack of a better term.
100%. Yeah, that was a big one for me. Yeah, because I was not a huge Alpine cheese person, for example, mostly because when I was in high school, my family went on a trip to Switzerland and we started in Gruyere. And let's just say I like super duper overdid it on the fondue the very first night and had a rough night. And after that, like could not look an Alpine in the face. Was just like, I can't handle it.
I can't eat cashews.
Cannot do it.
Same reason. Went too hard.
As soon as, having experiences like that definitely makes you like, oh, geez Louise. But, that's a pretty major part of a cheese case. Yeah. And so, I'm glad that I sort of came to terms with that and came back around to them, because now, I don't feel that way about Alpines at all. We've reconciled, which is good. Or like, I love, my favorite kind of cheese is any super stinky washed rind that's like running away from you on the plate. Like that is my favorite. Not everyone likes that. Yeah. Learning how, that was, one of the biggest things that I learned, I think in my first, not even cheese job, but coffee job, was differentiating between I like this and this is a product of quality.
Agreed.
And that's what I tell people when I train them is like, being a professional to me in food means that you are able to divorce yourself and your own prejudices and likes from whether or not something is a quality product, because there are certain things that like I don't personally like very much, but they're good.
Oh yeah. There are wonderful things I can't stand.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And and having the ability to figure out the difference is what's going to make it or break it for you, in my opinion.
Yeah. And being able to translate that to a customer is even more difficult.
Right, exactly. When you have someone who has kind of opposite tastes as like a person as you do, it's important to be able to put your own prejudices aside and also divorce yourself from like I like this because I like it. I like this because it's good.
It's good.
It's like, okay, but
I was thinking even just earlier today about you'll find it at cheese counter, or I do sometimes. You work with this customer, you're doing the damn thing. You get to this point where you're like, this is ending, and then you're pretty unsatisfied with the way it's played out. And then I find myself just being like, how did I go wrong here that we ended on this thing?
On this
right?
Cheese. Yeah, exactly.
And then later you're like, what? That was madness. You know what I mean? You just get in this mode where you're like, no, I know that this is kind of what you want.
Right.
Yeah, and divorcing yourself from that is really can be very hard.
It is really hard, but it's also so important.
Oh yeah, it's key to being good at anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're gonna sell anything that you believe.
Professional at anything.
Exactly. You're right. Yeah, professional.
But it's a fine line, because then I've worked with people, especially at the wine place. I worked with a few people who were like, I don't care if this is good or not, I'm going to sell the shit out of it.
Right.
Like, and that's something I never want to be. I never want to be duping people into, like, because then you get into like I'm going to sell the most expensive thing. I'm going to, like, it's this whole ego thing.
Yeah.
And the whole point of doing what we do, in my opinion, is to make people less scared of cheese, to make people excited about it, and to sort of match them up with what they need at that particular moment, and not to just like ring in the highest sale of the day.
It's backwards to the business. I mean, and I don't think it helps you. For me, there can't be help long term to your counter.
Right.
If you'll hear mongers say, I just sell what's open. Customer will walk up and they'll be like, well, I have this open right now. Now, I'm not saying that's always the wrong answer.
Right. Sometimes it's the right answer.
Sometimes, 1% of the time, in my experience, that might be the right answer.
Right.
You had that open. That's also like what they wanted.
Easiest thing.
But it's easy. It's when you're a customer, you might not notice it, and maybe you pass that quickly, and you're like, that was fast and easy. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
But you're also never going to say to yourself, like, that's why I visit that counter.
Right.
That's why they are.
Although there are times where, like, this was a big pet peeve of mine when I worked behind a counter, where like I would be so excited to help someone find what they wanted, and they would just like cut me off and be like, I don't care. Yeah. Like it's just like, well, then why are you here? Yeah. Like, why are you not at the grocery store? Right.
There's some days I love that, right? There are those days where you're like, thank you, Jesus. Yeah. Like, God damn it. I'm so glad that went easy, because it seemed to be taking a turn.
Exactly. You're like, you know what? Sure. Cool,
yeah.
Whatever. You do you.
Yeah. But it can be, so difficult. And especially, I know you do a lot of training. And I think that when you're working with mongers, there always comes this time, right, where you're trying to sort of show them this bigger picture.
Right.
And that picture has very little to do with the cheeses that they love or find romantic.
Right.
It has to do with this much larger understanding, like, why in the fuck you're actually standing here looking at people over this counter,
Right. Why does it matter?
Every place I go, or I try to tell mongers as much as possible, every retail experience you have is this piece of the puzzle. You have this whole collected memory of the worst and the best you've ever been treated.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's difficult to maybe hone that into a point where you are like, I'm gonna do this,
Totally. Yeah.
But it's key to being a great monger.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I've as much as I love cheese, and obviously I love cheese a lot, for me, what has kept me in this business and kept me sort of coming back to it are those interactions with customers.
Yeah.
And, I've seen some of the best mongers, or like best retail or best barista people that I've worked with. They aren't the most knowledgeable necessarily.
For sure.
But they have a kindness and a patience and a love of talking to and working with people that trumps everything else. I mean, that being said, you do need to know some things in order to be effective.
As long as the knowledge is not wrong.
Right. Exactly.
You're okay.
But like conversely, I've seen people who know so much and are not good at their jobs when they're behind a counter. Like it's not an appropriate place for them because they make people feel dumb and they just turn people off in general. They push too hard. They don't engage enough. They don't have patience. Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, that first coffee shop job I got a full-time job while I was working there. And so I had to, basically I should have quit because I was working 5 days a week. But I kept a shift every week because I loved the interaction across the counter. Right. And that's something that I still love to do. That sort of like pairing people up, making them excited. When I left that first cheese job, I got a couple like cards and things from, regulars of mine saying thank you so much and all that. Like those sorts of things are really, for me, what keeps it fun and interesting and exciting. Having people come back, getting to know your customers,
that shared experience that you get on a regular basis too.
Yeah, exactly right. But I mean, so it has to be both. It's not just about the cheese. It's not just about,
for sure. Have you found transitioning out of Via Umbria to this very different sort of world? Obviously, you're not behind a case as much. Right. You're not working in the same capacity, at all. You're not. It's just a different capacity.
Totally.
Right? Like the way that you approach this has to be so different. Was it a difficult transition at first? Or
I really liked it. I mean, basically,
you're just ready.
Yeah, I was really ready for it, and
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. Just quick before we go, at Monger Podcast on all platforms, mongerpodcast.com if you're looking to get in touch, mongerpodcast at Gmail. So please don't hesitate. Get in touch if you want to talk to us or know someone who you think might want to. Anyway, thanks, everybody. We will talk to you soon.